All right, looks like we have a bunch of people who have joined. So welcome and thanks for joining us today for Winthrop Wealth webinar series. I'm excited to host Jean Dunn today with us from T. Rowe Price to discuss how successful families approach money. Thank you for T. Rowe Price for helping us out and hosting Jean. And Jean, I'm gonna let you take it away.
All right, thank you so much, and thanks all of you for attending today. I know your time is valuable. And today we're going to talk about some proprietary research that T. Rowe Price did, all around families and all around how they communicate and work with each other, or sometimes don't work as effectively with each other around money. We know that money, according to the American Psychological Association, is the #1 source of stress for Americans, regardless of income or wealth, but it doesn't have to be that way. And today I'm going to share with you some insights that we heard in terms of best practices about successful families and how they approach money. And I think it's important to acknowledge when we're talking about successful families, we're not necessarily just talking about the wealth that you've accumulated. We're talking about families that we heard self-reported less stress, more ease in working with family members around their finances. We're also going to talk about your attitudes and beliefs about money. In our research, one of the things that we found is that oftentimes conflicts are caused because different family members have different attitudes and beliefs about money. But oftentimes we aren't aware of these attitudes. We're going to go through an exercise where you can start to think about your attitudes and beliefs and potentially think about another family member's attitudes and beliefs and perhaps how you can change things just slightly going forward. And last but not least, we'll talk about how the financial professionals at Winthrop Wealth can help you in your journey to connect with family members. So first, I thought I'd start with a little story around professional hockey players. And this comes from the book Outliers that Malcolm Gladwell put out a few years ago. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the book, but what I thought was really interesting about this book is the story around professional hockey players in Canada. And there was a study done on these professional hockey players, and what it found is that disproportionately, professional hockey players were born in the months of September and October. And I'm pretty sure the month of your birth has nothing to do with your ability to play hockey. But what I think was really fascinating is that they dug a little bit deeper and they realized that most of these individuals were being, the cutoff date for school was August. So these individuals that were born in September and October were just a little bit stronger, a little bit older, maybe a little bit more flexible, and perhaps the coaches spent a little bit more time with them. They had more time playing time, and so this tiny advantage of a few months older difference in their peers, accumulated to a significant advantage over time. And I think the same thing happens with money and finances, both in the fact that if you start investing early, you can have a significant advantage when you invest over a longer period of time, but also in your interactions with your family members. I'm not suggesting that you're going to make huge wholesale changes in terms of your dealings with your family members, but I'm going to give you a little bit of suggestions of how you might approach things just slightly differently. And again, I think those different approaches can accumulate. You can have a significant accumulation over time. Okay. My apologies. Let me get to the right slide. So, in terms of the individuals, yep.
Sorry to interrupt. I think you need to share your screen.
Okay, I'm not sure if I just got disconnected. Let's see.
There we go. Perfect.
Okay, my apologies. For some reason, everything went blank for a second, so I came back up. All right. So when we think about the keys to less stress, so these are the individuals who reported less stress and more ease around communicating with family members. There were three components to it. Number one is communication. Establishing ongoing communication with your partner and other family members, and we'll get into this, all three of these in a lot more detail. The second one was about defining your vision. So successful families oftentimes have a written record of what their financial vision is for themselves and their families. It's a great way to communicate values, and we'll get into an exercise where you can start to think about what your vision is for yourself and your family. And last but not least, we know that successful families focus on educating that next generation. We can't rely on the great American financial education system to educate the next generations. That's a bad joke. There is no great American financial education system, but there are a lot of resources and, again, small things that you can do to communicate your values and your attitudes and beliefs, and also your knowledge about your finances to the next generation. But first, let's get into why it is so difficult to connect. You know, in our research, one of the things we found out was that families fight about money. There are ongoing conflicts that can inhibit your ability to communicate with family members, but it doesn't, again, have to be that way. And so what we've done is we found this pattern to oftentimes conflicts around money, and it's directly connected to your attitudes and beliefs. We all have individual attitudes and beliefs about money, oftentimes based on early childhood experiences. So we're going to take you through an exercise today to start to think about what these attitudes and beliefs are that you have, and also think about potentially another member of your household and what their attitudes and beliefs are. And I believe there's a handout that you're able to access that you can follow along. But also, if you don't have the handout, you can follow along right on the screen, and we'll go through these 4 different dynamics that we saw over and over again with the families in our research. And it'll be interesting to see where you fall. So the first dynamic, savers versus spenders, probably not a surprise to any of you. And the vast majority of individuals in our research stated that their partner was the opposite of them. Now, I know opposites attract, but not in every situation. And what we realized when we dug a little bit deeper is that oftentimes this is a relative dynamic, meaning the more extreme saver often perceives the spender, the other partner, as a spender, even if they aren't necessarily a huge spender, relatively speaking. So I'd love for all of you just to take a second. And if you'll notice on each of these dynamics, we think it's on a continuum. So we have a scale of 1 to 10. So think about yourself and think about where you might fall on a scale from 1 to 10. Are you a saver? Or are you more of a spender? And then perhaps pick another member of your family and think about where they might fall on this saver-spender dynamic. And an easy way to do that is just to draw a line, and you can see on the screen, Daniel, he's an extreme saver, so he's more on the 1. His partner, Nora, is more of a spender, so she is on the second one. Now, I talked about how this is a relative term. In one of our research, in one part of our research, one of our participants said, if only my husband would stop saying, "Why did you buy that? Look at all your clothes." And she went on to say that she bought a new outfit once every decade or so. This was not an extreme spender, but she spent more than her partner, so he perceived her as a spender. Now, I just want to acknowledge that attitudes are not necessarily behaviors, and inherently, they're not right or wrong in and of themselves. I recognize the saver is the person helping you save to meet your financial goals. But another phenomenon I've experienced, and we've seen a lot in the financial industry, is the extreme saver who doesn't necessarily know how much is enough. There's never that answer to the question, have you saved enough? And so sometimes the counsel is, if you prepared enough, if you accumulated enough assets to meet your goals, it's okay to spend a little money to have experiences with your family today. So in moderation, there can be validity to both points of view. Okay, so the second one, this is a big one. And this oftentimes falls along gender lines. This is security, the need to feel secure and protected. And when you're thinking about money and investing, you know, the less of a willingness to have short-term losses like we're experiencing right now in market volatility, you know, a more focus on keeping the assets that you currently have versus valuing opportunity. And opportunity is kind of that willingness to have, you know, navigate short-term ups and downs of the financial market in order to obtain a longer-term investment, higher investment returns. Now, again, one is not right and one is not wrong, but we found out that this oftentimes falls along gender lines. Gartner does some independent research. They ask Americans what they value most, and it turns out that women value security, again, the need to feel secure and protected, you know, keeping those assets that you have. Women value security 29 points higher than men on a 100-point scale. That's a really significant difference. Women value security much more than men. And I'm going to add another layer of complexity on this for you. And that's the fact that the word risk, which is a word that oftentimes we use in the financial industry. I'm sure all of you have been asked that question, what's your risk tolerance? But the word risk is perceived differently based on your gender. So when men hear the term risk, it's viewed in a positive light. You know, risk is go big or go home. To men, risk means I need to go out and feed my family. Risk is necessary for survival to men. But when women hear the term risk, women often perceive the term risk in a negative light. To women, risk is something that you do that's bad, that may or may not result in a negative outcome. To women, risk is not wearing your seatbelt. Risk is not putting your children in a car seat. And so these different values of valuing security and opportunity, and these different perceptions of the word risk can sometimes result in miscommunications around your investment strategy. So again, I'd love for you to think about in this same exercise where you might fall in terms of valuing security or valuing opportunity, and where another member of your family might fall on a 1 to 10 scale. I want to spend a little bit more time on this word risk. So I was talking to a group of women investors, and I shared the story about the word risk, and one woman said, oh my gosh, I need to have a conversation with my financial professional. I remember him asking me that question, what's my risk tolerance? And in my mind, I heard, what's my tolerance for jumping off a cliff? So it's definitely something to be aware of, is sometimes there's just miscommunication based on our own perceptions and our own values. But the good news is the more aware you are, the more intentional you can be, and the more understanding you can be of another partner that potentially has a different point of view. So again, security and opportunity, one is not right and one is not wrong. For individuals that value security, a great question to ask that individual is, what is it going to take for you to feel safe and secure financially, meeting those security needs? That could be maybe beefing up your emergency fund. You know, real estate. I recognize real estate's an illiquid asset, but that can be a source of security. So you know, putting up a pile or putting up designating a certain amount of, whether it's insurance or a real estate or even your emergency fund, but kind of separating that and designating that out and saying, okay, this helps me feel safe and secure financially. What we found is once you can meet those security needs, then individuals feel more comfortable making investments for long-term financial goals. So it's not necessarily an either and or, but if you have a partner or if you're someone that values security, make sure you're meeting your security needs, and perhaps you can feel more comfortable investing for long-term goals. But again, just being aware of where you are and where your partner is a huge source of new conversations and new understanding. The next obligation is really interesting, and this is around who perhaps focuses on the finances in your family. Who's the household CFO, that primary decision maker for investments and long-term financial planning? Now, I recognize, and let me take a second and pause and say, I'm sharing a lot of generalizations here. You know, in general, people are like this, and there's always exceptions to every generalization. So I certainly recognize that. But oftentimes what we see, there was an academic study done, and it shared that there's a division of financial duties in households with more than one partner. One partner becomes that household CFO, the primary decision maker for investments and long-term financial planning. And oftentimes we'll see the other partner, for lack of a better term, become like the household financial manager. They're doing the day-to-day expenses, paying the bills. When we had checkbooks, balancing the checkbooks. And what we found is sometimes those roles are precipitated on your attitudes towards investments and the market in general. So some individuals are really fascinated with markets. They love talking about investments, especially to other individuals and your financial advisor. But we see other individuals who know that investing and financial markets are important, but view it more as an obligation. And no offense to Jimmy or any of the folks at Winthrop Wealth, but if the folks that are more of the obligation, talking to your financial advisor, talking about your financial plan can kind of be like going to the dentist. Again, it's important, but it's not top on your list of fun things to do. So again, thinking about where you might fall. Are you more on that fascinated side? Do you love talking about investments, or are you more on the obligated side? Can make you more intentional about your approach going forward. And then the last dynamic, which I think is really fascinating, is around individuals' comfort level with talking to other family members about money and finances. And this can include partners. So we see that about 50% of the population, the adult population in the United States, is really open to talking to family members about money. But there's this other 50% of the population, and especially with high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals, we see a lot of high net worth individuals in the second bucket, and it's individuals that value privacy. They're in some way reluctant to talk to family members about finances. And there's a lot of good reasons why. And in our research, we oftentimes saw generational differences in this dynamic, talking about money, finances and money with family members. So we heard from the older generation. The older generation said, well, it's my money. I earned it. And especially with regards to adult children, they said, hey, it's none of my adult children's business about my finances. And then we hear from the younger generation. The younger generation would say, I don't even care about an inheritance. I just want to make sure mom's okay. I need to know, do I need to build an in-law suite? So there's these misperceptions, miscommunications happening. But the biggest misperception that we heard from individuals that value privacy, they're in some way reluctant to talk to family members about money. They said, well, I don't want to have a conversation about my finances with my family because that would have to include numbers. And, my portfolio is a certain dollar amount today, and this rings really true in our current market environment. I have no idea what it's going to look like, a few years from now. I don't know what unexpected cost I might have in the future. I don't want to share a number and set a false expectation when the time comes if that number is very different. So one thing I think is really important to share with you is a conversation about finances with family members absolutely does not need to include numbers. And in fact, the most important thing, if you're going to have one conversation with family members about your finances, it's really about something that has nothing to do with your net worth or what you're investing in. It has everything to do with where the information about your finances are, where the important documents are, where your usernames and passwords are, maybe your will, your healthcare power of attorney. What we found in our research research is that families that valued privacy, that did not have these conversations with family members, unintentionally caused their family pain when they weren't able to access all of these important documents and information. I'll give you a specific story. There was a gentleman in our research. He was the executive of his uncle's estate. He described his uncle, these are his words, not mine, as paranoid. His uncle was a high net worth individual, had a lot of assets, and he said once he started working on the estate, he said it was a complete mess. There were accounts all over the place, money stashed in weird places in the house. We hear this all the time. He said it took him 2 years to sort out his uncle's estate. The worst thing, he said, was he didn't even know if he captured all of these assets. So it's certainly, there's certainly a lot of valid reasons why you maybe value privacy. But it's also important to understand the unintended consequences of never having these conversations with family members. And what I find fascinating is what happened next. This gentleman, again, before this experience with his uncle's estate, valued privacy. He had 2 adult daughters, and his opinion was, I want them to be successful on their own. I don't want them to be counting on anything, so I'm not going to talk to them about finances. But he said after he went through that experience with his uncle's estate, unfortunately his wife had passed away, and he said, I sat down and I had a conversation with my 2 daughters because I didn't want them to go through what I went through. So critically important. I'll give you one other quick example. There was a financial advisor shared with me, a client unexpectedly passed away in his 40s. He was the household CFO. He was the financial manager. He did everything. He did the checking account, the investments and everything. And this gentleman had paperless statements. Everything was on his cell phone. So he unexpectedly passes away. His wife doesn't have the password to his cell phone. You think Apple or Google or any provider is going to give her his password? So in one of the worst moments of her life, caring for young children, she doesn't even have access to her checking account. She doesn't even know what the checking account number is because there's paperless statements. So if there's one thing that I think is critically important is organizing your family records. And again, you don't have to give your family records to your family. You just need to make sure they know who to go to or where to find the information when they need it. I'll give you one other story that takes a little bit different take on this. There was an individual in our research, and he said every year he wrote a love letter to his wife on Valentine's Day. And he said in this love letter, he said, I've got, every investment account that I have. And he said, it's not even just investments and finances. I've got where, all the bills, because they're all on auto pay. I've got the name of the pool person, the lawn person, all the information that she would ever need is in this love letter. And he said, I write it every year because things change, passwords change, and I want to make sure it's up to date. And he said, this is my love letter. This is my gift to her because I don't want her to have to deal with any of these things. I know it's going to be a difficult time for her. I don't want her to deal with any of that. Of course, I wanted to ask him, I hope you put some I love yous, and I'm sure he did in that love letter, but it just illustrates the gift of communicating what is important to that to that other group. So I'd love for you all to think about where you might fall on this last dynamic. Do you value privacy? Are you in some way reluctant to talk to family members about your finances? Or are you on the other side? You're really open to talking to family members. Again, one is not right and one is not wrong. But let's say you're on that open side. And I've talked to many families, many individuals who said, I've tried to have a conversation with another family member and they don't want to have that conversation back with me. So just starting to do this exercise, you can start to understand perhaps that someone has a little bit of a different value and approach it a little bit differently going forward. So when you put it all together, you can think about where you might fall on each of these different dynamics and where your partner or another family member might fall on each of these different dynamics. So this is a great conversation to have with another family member after this call. you approach it with an area, or with an attitude of curiosity. I think it's pretty fascinating. Oftentimes when we talk to family members, and maybe when we're, when you talk to individuals who are thinking about getting married, they have these conversations about, do you want to have kids? And where do you want to live? And how do you want to raise those kids? What kind of values do you want to have? But less frequently do we talk about what our attitudes are around money. So in any time, it's great to have these conversations. A great conversation, or a great question to ask a family member is, what's your earliest money memory? And oftentimes this can help you. Those early money memories can really shape attitudes that we have even today. So now we're going to get into those best practices, those 3 ways that you can have less stress and more ease and better communication with family members around money. So again, communication is one of the first ones. So establishing ongoing communication with your partner, I think, is one of the first things that you want to do. If you have multiple generations, thinking about how you might want to approach communication with different individuals in your families, especially those ones that value privacy a little bit differently going forward. So a great example that I'll share with you personally, my dad values privacy. He does not talk to anyone about money. My mother's passed away, and we want to make sure Dad's okay, all my brothers and sisters. And so one suggestion, and I give this to you, but I've done it myself, is model the behavior that you're looking for in another family member. So I told my dad, hey, I want to sit down and I want to share all of my information with you. I shared my will. I shared, again, it's not numbers, it's not financial information, but the documents that he needed, the healthcare power of attorney. And so again, modeling the behavior that I was looking for from him. Now, did he turn around and open up his file and share information with me? No, there was not an immediate result. But what I found interesting is several months later, he did sit down and have a conversation with my brother. So I'm not expecting immediate different changes, but if you're just planting that seed that you can have a conversation in a way that works for you. And again, this is a great way that you can work with the folks at Winthrop Wealth. You can talk to them about, maybe you want to have a family meeting, but you only want to talk about certain things. You can set an agenda and say, here's the things that I want to talk about. Here's the things that I think I am less comfortable with, or I don't want to address in this meeting. And they can help you, have those conversations in a way that works for you. The second one, we didn't spend, let's spend a minute on this. So we talked about communication. Let's talk about defining your vision. Now, why is defining your vision so important? I'll give you a little personal story. I am a spender, and I grew up in a family of savers. I grew up thinking that money was kind of this all-present elephant in the room, guided every decision my family made with an attitude towards scarcity. And I still remember to this day hearing those dreaded 4 words, we can't afford it. And those words didn't make sense to me because we lived in a pretty comfortable existence, a nice neighborhood. My dad had a great job, so I didn't understand why we couldn't afford it. And so I started to internalize, we can't afford it, as you're not worth it. So when I grew up, I spent as an expression of my self-worth. And it is pretty fascinating. Spenders and savers have their brains react differently. Savers' brains reward them when they see their account balances grow up. Spenders' brains reward them when they spend. But when I started to realize that I was a spender, I approach things a little bit differently. I give myself a 24-hour rule. So whenever I see something on the phone, social media does a great job of saying, hey, you should buy this. I say to myself, okay, I'm going to wait 24 hours. If I'm still thinking about this object, maybe I'll consider buying it. But another thing, an equally important part to me, was defining my vision for myself, to have great big spending goals. And those actually encourage me to save to meet my even bigger spender goals. And so another reason I bring up defining your vision, and we're going to go through this exercise in a minute, It's, again, I shared with you, my parents valued privacy. We didn't talk about money when we were growing up. But if my parents had a financial vision, if I could write it for them today, it would be, we save first and we spend as a last resort because we prioritize education. And in fact, I'm one of 5 children. My parents sent all of us through private school, K through 12, and they gave us the tremendous gift of paying for my college education. And, I exited college debt-free, which I know is a rare thing. But that was my parents' vision for my family. Never articulated it. So that is why I think it's so important, is your family members are not mind readers. They don't understand why you make the decisions that you make. So if you can share your values with them in a vision statement, I think there's less of a chance of misinterpretation of actions. So there's 3 questions. So if there's one thing you can do after today, it's spending some time on this. And the first question to answer is, what's my financial vision for myself? Just like when you go on an airplane, you got to put the mask on yourself before you put the mask on a loved one. So what's your financial vision for yourself? Make sure you're meeting your security needs if security is important to you. The second question is, what's my financial vision for my family? The third question is, what's my financial vision for my legacy or that next generation? Now, I recognize these are big questions, and I'll give you a couple of helpful hints. Number one, the first thing I would do is encourage you to write down the answer just to the first question. A couple reasons why. Writing down something helps you clarify your thinking. And the second thing is, these are not questions that we necessarily ask ourselves every day. So if you write it down, it provides you with a written record. So maybe a year from now, you come back and you look at it and you see how things change. And this is the last point I want to make. Sometimes people are really concerned about answering these questions. They say, what if I get it wrong? I say it's impossible for you to get it wrong, because your financial vision for yourself and your family and your legacy is going to change and evolve over time, because circumstances change and evolve over time. But the most important thing you can do is start writing it down. And again, this is a great thing to share with your financial professional and share with your family members, and maybe even make it an exercise into having family members take part in it. The last thing I'll say is there's no right or wrong format. So I've seen multiple pages from one family. A lot of times it's just a couple different bullets as a starting point, and again, it'll evolve over time. You can revisit it on a periodic basis. One gentleman he showed me his business card, and on the back of it was 4 different bullets. He said, this is my financial vision. So one is not right and one is not wrong. The most important thing to do is to start. And it's such a great way to communicate your values around money to your entire family. Okay, so the last one, and I would encourage you, if you have questions for me, start thinking about questions as I'm wrapping up comments. But the last one is around education. And this is one thing that I think is pretty fascinating. And individuals that value privacy, they're some way reluctant to talk to family members about money. This is actually an area where we see a different point of view, where they see the value of educating the next generations, whether it be children, grandchildren, around money and finances. At T. Rowe Price, we have been focused on financial literacy for a really long time. We partnered with a group called Scholastic that develops educational materials to create a huge collection of financial literacy materials. It's available to all of you. You can see on the screen, the website's called moneyconfidentkids.com. There's lessons for educators. You can give them to your teachers. There's educations for parents. And I encourage all of you to utilize that resource. But I also want to acknowledge that learning about money and finances isn't just about sitting down and having a formal conversation about what a stock is and what a bond is. To me, there's really a little thing that you can do that's going to communicate your values around money to that next generation. And that is, every time you make a big purchase in your family, I'd love for you to take the time to walk through your decision-making process with that next generation. I'll give you an example. So a couple of years ago, I bought a new car. My car is bright blue. And when I'm saying bright blue, it's bright blue. And my nephew, I don't have any kids, but I have lots of nieces and nephews. My nephew Carson was kind of making fun of me a little bit. He's like, "Hey, Aunt Jean, nice car. Like, what's with the bright blue color?" And I said, "Well, Carson, you want to know why I picked bright blue?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm kind of the weird old aunt," but he took the bait and I said, "Because I wanted to go to Belize." And of course, I perplexed him, but maybe intrigued him a little bit at this point. He's like, "What are you talking about? What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, let me take a second and tell you what my process was." I said, a couple months ago, a while ago, I decided I needed to get a new car. My old car was on its last legs. And so I saved up enough money because it was important to me not to go into debt. And I gave myself a budget. I said, okay, this is the amount of that I'm going to purchase for this car. I started to look at all the features. I value security, so I want the safety and reliability and security features in the car. I don't care how fast. I have no need to go from 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds or whatever it is. So that's not important to me. I wanted room in the back for my 2 dogs, but I don't really care what color it is. But that's not important to me. So I end up going on the lot with the salesperson, and we started talking about the model, and I noticed there were a lot of bright blue cars in the model that I wanted on the lot. And so we got around to, what color do you want? And I said, well, does it make a difference in price? And he said, well, yeah, if you want that bright blue model, I'll give you a little bit of a discount. The last thing I did, Carson, knowing that I'm a spender, when I had my budget number, I said, if I can get a car below that budget number that I have saved, that's my fun money. And that year I'd wanted to go to Belize. That discount for getting that bright blue actually paid for my plane ticket to Belize. Now think about what I just did in that moment. So this is not some big formal lecture, but I told Carson how important it was for me to not go into debt for a purchase, to save a certain amount of money, to have a budget going in, to prioritize what's important to me and what's not important to me, to share the fact that negotiation can be as simple as asking the question, does it make a difference in price? And last but not least, knowing my attitudes and beliefs, putting a little bit of fun in there and letting myself have fun money if I could get in below my budget. So a quick way to communicate the values that you have about finances to that next generation. So just to wrap it up, and again, if you have questions, feel free to start thinking about those. If you're thinking about how you can approach your finances with more ease and less stress, think about establishing ongoing communication. This can involve a lot of different ways. Use your financial advisor as a resource. They can help you figure out ways to communicate difficult topics in a way that works for you. Secondarily, defining your vision is critically important in communicating that with family members so they understand what your values are and what's important to you. Last but not least, education. There's lots of formal resources that you can use to educate that next generation. We all know how important it is to save early, but it doesn't have to be formal. When you have, decisions that you're making every day around finances, perhaps communicate the why behind it to those family members, why you made certain decisions. And that can be truly, an enlightening experience for them. So I'll pause right there. I hope you found some value in some of my comments, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have for me.
Thanks, Jean. That was a great presentation, and it's something that is definitely near and dear to what we communicate with our clients about the planning process and why that's so important. And I just love what you said about defining your financial vision just for yourself, your family, and your legacy. I mean, it's so important. And we're big fans of writing things down because we feel that the physical process of writing something down helps you memorialize it, right? And make it that much more important. So If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them down in the question box and we can spend some time answering them. But in the meantime, something I think just to bring up off of something that you brought up, which was about communicating with your family, something that we see quite often with some of our younger families in the 40s and early 50s is they have not had that conversation with their parents about finances, and so they're kind of in the dark. There's a privacy wall right there. They have no idea. And when we go through the planning process with these families, one of the questions that always comes up or that we ask them is, do you anticipate having to support your parents financially in any way? And most of the time the question, it's pretty thought-provoking, because most of the time they have no idea. And so, well, I don't know. My parents have always been comfortable. I don't know if I have to support them financially. So that's a big, I think it's been enlightening for us to see that response keep coming back, is I don't know, especially for some of these, they're not young, but they're not old, those 40s, mid 50s with kids in their teens. So the importance of just communication is huge.
Yeah, I so appreciate that. And I also appreciate that dynamic of it can be a really difficult conversation and it can be a difficult topic to bring up to individuals that raise you and were responsible for you. Another thing I've heard from other individuals is, maybe it's easing into that conversation, and in an easy way is to start to talk about healthcare directives. Especially the events of the last couple of years, I think, have made families more open to say, if there's, just in case, anything happens, I just want to make sure I know, we're carrying your wishes out. I want to make sure if you don't have a healthcare directive, we're going to do that. That can be an easy way perhaps to have that conversation. But I do want to acknowledge, and to your point, we've seen the same thing. Many folks haven't had those conversations among generations, and it can be really difficult, really hard.
Absolutely. And I think just going back to the importance of planning, right? Financial planning, life planning, knowing what happens if, and knowing the answer can give a lot of stress relief and provide a better night's sleep. I think it says a lot. But estate planning, so we do a lot of family meetings, and we try to incorporate all generations into most of these meetings to the extent that the clients want to incorporate them. But we do feel it's extremely important. And I think the estate planning topic that you just mentioned is probably one of the best ways to incorporate individuals and other family members, right? Is, do mom and dad have an estate plan? Do you know what happens if something happens to them? And it's again illuminating how many of our clients, they don't know, and their parents might be much older, and in some cases parents who have middle-aged children with families, is the same questions, right? Who are the guardians of your grandchildren, and do you know? Because if you don't, then it can cause a lot of drama and a time when you want to be able to grieve and really know that everything's going to be okay. So we're getting some questions in here. Let's see. So how do you feel about families providing financial support to nieces and nephews and other relatives that are not as well off if the money has no strings and it can be simply consumed versus invested? So I think that goes into like the mandate around generational wealth and gifting money to children who maybe aren't direct beneficiaries.
Yeah, so definitely this came up a lot in our research, and a wise estate planning. So one thing I'll share with you is just to take a step back, and one of the things we heard in our research is fairness is really important when you're thinking about giving, intergenerational wealth transfer and giving gifts to immediate family members and extended family members. There's this notion of it's so important to be fair, but also fairness is really complicated with different family members and different individual situations. And this wise estate planning attorney once told me, fairness doesn't necessarily equal equality. And I think a great example is, if a family has a child with special needs, You know, fairness you need to have more resources to help that individual with special needs. So I would say each family member's or each family's decision is really unique to their own circumstances and their own values. And I go back to that vision. Perhaps your vision is, one of the key things about my finances and my wealth is giving to that extended group. So to me, communicating what's important to you and incorporating those values so that it's not a surprise to extended family is important. And recognizing that fairness is this thing that comes up over and over again, but it can be really complicated and really dependent on the individual's family circumstance.
Thank you. Any suggestions on how to go about or providing some guidance around creating family mission statements or cornerstone statement?
Yeah, so, and I think to go back to one of the reasons I put this slide on here, defining your vision, is I was purposefully simplistic. I think this is important. So to acknowledge there is not one right or one wrong way to do this. And Jimmy, I don't know if you guys have specific guidance, but I've actually seen very complex ways, very complex series of questions that you can go through to really think about. Do you have a mission statement, especially if it's tied to charitable or philanthropic causes? So what I would share with you is what I'm giving with you is really a very simplistic starting point. There's not one right or wrong way to approach it, but what I think is important is to do something that works for you and your family. Because conversely, I've seen processes that are really complicated that no one ever gets to because it's so hard. So to me, the most important thing is to start, and you have the ability, once you write this down, it is going to change. Don't think that it's in stone, and you can evolve it and look at different approaches. And I would definitely recommend talking to your advisor at Winthrop Wealth. I bet they have some great resources for you as well.
That's very helpful. And we've done a number of family mission statements and tried to help guide our clients in defining what that is. Everybody's unique in their own situation and has different goals and things that they want to do. So that's, again, why the planning is so important, right? To really pull everything together. And I think that the planning really helps define the vision, but also create better communication across the household and the other members that are affiliated with the household. And I think from my experience in working with clients and seeing the other advisors at the firm work with clients and working with Next Gen, the plan is really what drives everything. And the importance of having that plan in place is critical to the success of the family. And if your vision is to leave a legacy, defining that legacy and having other family members understand what it is, why it's important to the family, I think it gets everybody on the same page and rowing in the same direction, and really reduces any stress and conflict amongst family members. So I think that's huge. All right. I think that's pretty much it as far as the questions here. So I appreciate everyone joining tonight, this afternoon. Thanks again, Jean and T. Rowe Price, for joining us. This was extremely helpful, and I thought it was a great presentation, and we value the partnership that we have with you guys. So thanks again, and hope everybody enjoys the rest of your day.
All right, thank you.